Hello readers, I'm David Reader and today we're reviewing Through Darkest Europe, written by Harry Turtledove in 2018. So Turtledove does something very unique in this book. He flips the script of what the developed world is and what the backward part of the world is. In this book, North Africa and the Middle East is prosperous, liberal and tolerant, while Europe is backward, intolerant and fundamentalist. So in this book, Islam is tolerant and secular, and Christianity is fundamentalist and intolerant. And the point of divergences are with two people, Thomas Aquinas and Al-Ghazali, who switch places in the intellectual sphere. So in reality, one of the origins of the West valuing reason is the Christian theologian Thomas Aquinas, and one of the reasons that the Middle East is much poorer, much less developed, much more intolerant than the West is because they followed Al-Ghazali, who basically believed you don't need to study science, just rely on the Quran. And in this book, the script is flipped, so Al-Ghazali is the one who promotes reason, and Thomas Aquinas is the one who promotes Christian fundamentalism and just read what the Bible says. So the countries that exist are a bit different in this book. So I think in North America you have Kyrgyzstan or something like that. You also have the Republic of the Maghreb with Tunis as its capital. You also have the Seljuk constitutional monarchy in Istanbul. And here Italy is united under a Grand Duchy, and the German states are disunited, and you have a bunch of European kingdoms such as France and Italy where they have progressive reformers as monarchs, but they have a lot of Christian fundamentalists within their country. And women have equal rights in this book. In the Middle East and North Africa, Jews are well treated, while in Christian Europe you have a lot of intolerance and women are badly treated. So the two main characters in this book that you follow the story of are Khalid and Dawood, and Khalid is a secular Muslim, Dawood is a secular Jew, and they are investigators who travel to the Grand Duchy of Italy to help the Grand Duke there, Cosimo, bring in order and reforms and progress, and also to fight the Aquinists. They're kind of advisors, and the Aquinists are terrorists. So think of Islamic terrorist groups in the real world like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. That's what the Aquinists are, but it's a Christian version in this book. The Pope here is also a progressive kind of, but there's fear among the Catholic Church to be a schism between the Aquinists and the more moderate Catholics. So getting into more details of what happens in this book. So you have a party where the Grand Duke is at, and he gets killed by a women's suicide bomber, so Cosimo is dead. And he is replaced by his much younger son Lorenzo, who's a bit of a hothead. So he holds an ostentatious funeral for his father. You have a bunch of international dignitaries who come in. And in this book, you have these guys who are called correctors, who are basically some of the leaders of the Aquinists. So you can think of them kind of as supreme leaders in the Christian fundamentalist hierarchy, although there are several of them. And they take one of the correctors, I think called Pacelli, as a hostage to ensure that the funeral procession goes well, but it doesn't. You have a shootout, you have violence, you have terrorism. Several international dignitaries get killed or injured. The corrector is killed in retaliation, and you get some implied torture scenes in this book of Aquinists, and you kind of have a guerrilla war between the Italian army and the Aquinists, which Dawood and Khalid take part in as advisors, although they do some fighting themselves. And they get one general fired and replace him with an officer from the Ministry of Information. But then they are under a much better general called Dall'Olio, who makes progress fighting in the Aquinists. So the Aquinists are being fought back. But there's a soldier who shows up to the general and just kills him and kills a few people before getting killed himself by other soldiers. So the scary thing is with this book, you have Aquinists who can be everywhere and nowhere. So you don't know who is an Aquinist in Italy, and you have these foreigners coming over in Italy to fight on the side of the crusading Aquinists. So after this, that general is replaced. Khalid and Dawood decide to return to the capital. They've seen enough fighting. But on their trip back, they're stopped. A couple of soldiers borrow their car, but that car ends up being blown up by Aquinists. And it turns out when Dawood and Khalid return to the Maghrebi embassy, that the ambassador received a call from the officer, Captain Salgari, who said, "Oh, it's so sad that these Maghrebis died." It turns out that Captain Salgari from the Ministry of Information set them up and is an Aquinist himself. So he gets tricked and called over to the embassy, where he proceeds to be arrested. And then the Grand Duke Lorenzo decides to have him executed, and Khalid and Dawood witness this. And now Khalid and Dawood decide, okay, it's time to get out of here. But Khalid brings with him a woman called Anarita, who's an Italian Christian woman, a bit more progressive than other Christians in this book. she's agreed to Khalid that they will get married together, and she's gonna move with him to Tunis. And the book ends with them getting married. And that's the story. So how would I rate Through Darkest Europe? I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. I would place it about at the same level as Joe Steele. So both are good books, but they also have some fallacious historical inaccuracies in those books. So several times in this book you have what, in my opinion, are fallacious statements of, oh, minorities or women have to work twice as hard to get ahead, implying that equality is not really true in practice in the developed world, which I would disagree with. And then implying that migrants who come to the developed world come there and are productive workers, which in Europe isn't really the case. Those are just a couple of minor problems I have with this book. Again, it's good alternate history. It's fascinating to have a liberal Islamic world and then a decadent Christian one. It could have been possible in theory, as back in the Middle Ages, at least prior to the year 1000, the Islamic world was more progressive than the Christian world. They were more liberal, they were more tolerant of religion, and they were more intellectual than Western Europe. But that eventually changed in the middle of the Middle Ages with Aquinas and Al-Ghazali. So reversing these two figures, it's interesting and it's quasi-plausible. Of course, it would have taken a few other thinkers to change things probably, but still, it's an interesting thought experiment. So overall, an 8 out of 10. Would I recommend this book? If you're interested in this concept, yes. If you like Harry Turtledove, yes also. He has some good humor in this book, especially with Dawood, who's a Jew, by the way, in this book. So it's not Harry Turtledove's best book, but it's still a good book. So if you're looking for another good Harry Turtledove book to read, then I would definitely recommend Through Darkest Europe. If you enjoyed this book review, then I would recommend you to check out my book review of Alpha and Omega, also by Harry Turtledove, which is an alternate history version where the end of days happen. Anyways, I'm the average reader, and I will see you readers next time.